So welcome again, everyone. I'm so pleased to have you all here for this webinar on the topic of ACEs. My name is Emily Ann Opala. I am the Knowledge and Research Lead here at the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health. I'm so happy to be here with you all to share in this wonderful knowledge. So before we get into it, I'd love to do a land acknowledgement. So I'd like to state that I'm coming to you all today from Treaty 13 territory, which is the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as many other Métis and First Nation peoples. It's also covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement to peaceably share the land. Octavia Butler once said, belief initiates action or it does nothing. And I like to think about that when I think about land acknowledgements. And I hope that our belief in the importance of land acknowledgements and in the importance of acknowledging the land, leads us to the action of actually supporting the Indigenous folks in our lives and in our communities as much as we can. So thank you all for that. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. You'll notice that I have turned on closed captioning at the bottom of your screens for ease of accessibility. If you'd like to turn those off or on, you can go to the bottom of your screen and click on closed captioning. We have a couple of other functions that you'll notice at the bottom of your screen. So the chat function at the bottom is for discussing your thoughts and your reactions to today's presentation. So any kinds of thoughts at all. One way that we could get started in the chat that I think would be really fun, I would love if folks could share where they're coming to us from, what traditional lands they are on. And if you need help with that, you can go to native-land.ca. I hope that the chat is working today. It may not be working. So hopefully the chat will be working today. So the Q&A function is for submitting questions to our panelists. It looks like our chat function is working, so that's good to see. Q&A function is for submitting questions to our panelists, which we'll be taking at the end of the webinar today. We're going to ask that you please fill out a brief survey at the end of the webinar today, just to let us know how today's webinar went. We take a lot from that survey. It's really important to us, so we ask that you please do that. Another thing to let you all know, recording will be available on our website at the end of this webinar, so check back tomorrow if you're looking for the webinar. One last thing I would like to do is I just want to put this PowerPoint slide up one more time. Because I would like to show you all, hopefully you guys can see that. Resume slideshow. Can folks see that? Yes? Okay, good. There we go. So the CICMH annual survey is happening right now. This is our survey that lets us know sort of what your needs are as members of the community working on campus and mental health. This is really important to us. We do this survey every year and we would love to get your feedback. So I'm going to leave that up for just another couple seconds in case folks want to open it up on their phones or save that particular address. It's CICMH Needs 2023 is the link. All right. So with that, I will now pass it over to our fantastic guest, Roger Romero, who's going to talk to us today about ACEs. So over to you, Roger.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Roger Romero, and I'm going to do a bigger introduction in my slides, but I want to just thank Emily for the invitation to come speak today, and specifically the thoughtfulness behind her land acknowledgement. And so I saw that Tanya D is joining us from Kingston, Ontario, St. Lawrence College specifically, I think anyways. And so St. Lawrence College is located in Kingston. That's where I'm coming to you from today. I did come to Canada as a child, and so my experience with learning about Indigenous people and the history of Indigenous people here in North America, Turtle Island specifically, it's been a journey, and so I acknowledge that. But when I hear land acknowledgements, I really think back to all of the elders, grandmothers, that I've worked with, that I've been able to connect with over my years in the work that I've done. And it's been, it just really warms my heart. I really find that in this work that I do, a lot about stress and toxic stress and what it feels like when someone else is in distress. And so when Emily's slides didn't work, my brain already went to like, wow, my slide's going to work. So I'll talk a little bit about that, about how our brain actually predicts and is predicting our next outcome. And so just really grateful today for you to join us. I always get really scared because I think that people aren't going to show up. And then when people show up, I'm just really grateful. So thank you for your time. I'm planning to speak about, probably about 45 minutes. I am a little bit of a chatterbox, so it's sometimes difficult for me to stop talking, but I hope that I'm going to share a lot of information with you today. The approach that I'm taking today is that you're new to this journey, and I'm going to share kind of the foundation of what the work we do. We do a lot more work in terms of training and educating and working in the communities. But I think without a strong foundation, nothing is really going to work. And so this is going to be your introduction today. I am talking about adversity. So obviously that's a difficult topic to talk about. Our society isn't made to talk about challenging situations. We like to push it aside. So as I know, it's a little bit different for some cultures. But I really understand that, these topics are difficult, but I hope I'm bringing this information today to bring you hope, actually, just to share that this is not a life sentence. Adversity is not a life sentence, but we can do a lot of really great work. And we don't have to be at this kind of like high level therapist to be therapeutic and have those healing interactions. So that's what it's about today. I will share my slides right now. So just give me a quick second. This is always the awkward part where the presenter fumbles with their slides. So I try my best to make it a little bit. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to ask Emily to monitor the chat and let me know if there's been any questions or any comments. Please stop me at any time, Emily, please, and that would be really helpful. Please use the question and answer feature, because that really helps me keep in mind of the questions. There will be this webinar will be shared. It's recorded, and also I'll give you a really cool article that we wrote with here in Kingston. We wrote in partnership with Queen's University and the Department of Family Medicine, and that's a really great read as well. So let's get started if that's okay. So the work that I do, like I said, my name is Roger Romero. I am on most social medias. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. So the one thing about this work, it's about relationships. And so even though you're coming to me today and it's not super interactive, we want to have relationships with you. We want to chat with you. So we're committed to having 1,000 cups of coffee or 1,000 cups of anything that you like to drink in a way to connect and share this information. So after today, if you're more interested or you want to just chat, please reach out. We have a team of people who are ready to receive your conversations and have this work. If you're curious, if you're an expert, welcome to the journey. It's something that we're really passionate about. So I do work for the Kingston Community Health Centers. And if you understand the community health center model, it's really a holistic approach to supporting kind of that traditional medical field, right? So we do have a full medical clinic, but we also have a variety of different in-house social supports and social programming. And we work towards the social determinants of health. I specifically work with young people, but more specifically, I work in education. And education is one of the most prominent social determinants of health. So the more education that you have, the more the likelihood of you having better or more positive health and social outcomes increases. It's just the same thing as access to resources like financial resources, access to housing, and things like that. So we're really talking about supporting kind of the holistic support for the community. There's health centers in most of Ontario, and you can probably connect with some of the health centers within your region. But my work is specifically with young people. So I've been working at the Kingston Community Health Center for almost 13 years now, and I've had a variety of different roles. And it's really interesting because when you think about today, I'm speaking to people who are helping young people at the post-secondary level. I didn't plan this kind of work. I didn't think I was going to get into this kind of work, but what we know about life is that it comes and we take opportunities as they arise. And I really think that our lived experience really shapes the trajectory of our world. And so when we understand ourselves a little bit better, we understand others, we have a very good approach in accessing some of these really great programs and really great opportunities, which I've had the privilege to do. So please reach out if you want to learn more, if you want to talk to me about anything that we've shared today. And so my portfolio as a manager of youth services is supporting a variety of different programs. And the one program that I support is Pathways to Education. And I'll talk a little bit more about Pathways to Education, but if you're familiar, there might be a site in your city There's 22 sites across the country, including Quebec and both on the East and West Coast. And we support young people who are facing a variety of barriers and challenges to accessing education. And most often, these communities are communities that have people who are learning or are earning low income wages. And so we really support young people who are facing a variety of barriers. Sorry, I'm using these slides a little bit tricky. Anyways, I wanted to start by introducing myself a little bit more, and I like to talk a little bit about my own personal experience because I think it's really relevant to the work that I share. These two pictures are of me, and the picture on the left is of my childhood in El Salvador. So I was born in El Salvador in the 1980s, and I was born into a time where there was a civil war, a conflict in El Salvador. During that time, my family had to flee El Salvador. And we made our trek towards North America. We took an underground passage of travel to make it to the United States. And then we entered the United States undocumented. And the one thing when I do is when I share my story, I learned this from an elder that I've worked with. And he said, sharing personal experiences is very important. But he goes, and he told me, he's like, I share my experiences from the scar, not the open wound. And so when I talk to you or when I share about asking about sharing personal experiences, I do hope that you share it from a place of growth, a place where you've had time to work through some of those challenges, you've sought out support. But I think it's important to connect with people in a way that makes us feel more human, helps us really make that relationship. And so a lot of the work we do is about relationships. And so I start with this journey. My story is not easy, and I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of my story, but being displaced by a war, becoming an undocumented person in the United States, and then finally making my family made a passage from the United States to Canada as refugees. So we became this country as refugees, and I'm really grateful for Canada to accept refugees at that time and to bring us here. So the picture on the left is my childhood in El Salvador. And then my picture on the right is a little island off of just a little bit west of Kingston. And it's called Amherst Island. And so for me, I remember as a child, this picture specifically, because as a child, I remember thinking, how do people have two houses? That, people had this cottage on the island and then also had a house in Kingston. And so I was just I was blown away by the amount of things that people had. But it's really interesting to see that, growing up in North America from a Latin American background, it was really that kind of culture push, right? And so one of the challenges with that is that my parents had to relearn everything, right? They had to relearn the language, they had to retrain. And what happened was that my parents struggled to do that, but also struggled to make financial contributions to our family. They were working long hours, getting paid low wages, and that just created a lot of stress at home, a lot of adversity in my childhood. And so when I think about that, I don't blame my parents. I think they did the best they could, and they did as much as they could. But we often don't think about that when we work with newcomers. Is yes, we make it here, we flee a war, we're completely safe, but there's a whole variety of challenges that happen, right? And so when you think about the young people that you're working with, racialized people or people who are coming from other countries, newcomers, it's not just the safety of a war that we're fleeing. We're starting again, and we're looking at that. So when we think about this work that I'm talking about today, as someone who's supporting young people, we have to take that into consideration, right? So not that you're going to go in there and ask the deep questions, but have that in the back of your mind, understanding how can we support people without knowing their story completely. And so my story, like I said, we grew up in a very challenging situation, lots of adversity in my childhood. Mostly the kind of the root cause I think about it is poverty. We lived in social housing. We accessed schools that were underfunded. And so it was a lot of challenges that we faced. Thankfully, we were able to have more children while we were in Canada. We had 5 kids total, so I have a large family. But we all had very different outcomes. And I was actually very curious. I was like, why does my outcomes, I ended up going to post-secondary, I graduated, and I found really good, meaningful work. But a lot of my siblings didn't. I was always curious, what's different about me? How did I make this approach when some of my other siblings struggled? And for me, it was really understanding, I want to dig deeper. I want to find out why. And this is where understanding adversity and understanding ACEs really comes into play. So the program that I work with is Pathways Education. So I'm telling these stories because I promise you they will all tie in together. But Pathways Education, like I said, supports young people who are living in identified low-income neighborhoods. The neighborhood that I serve in Kingston is called Rideau Heights and Inner Harbor. So it's the north end of Kingston. I grew up in that neighborhood. And when I was growing up in that neighborhood and I attended school in that neighborhood, this program didn't exist. And so what happened was this program came, it's a really lovely program. So I encourage you to use the QR code, learn more about us and learn about this program. But what it does is it wraps around supports for young people who are facing a variety of barriers. And so when we think about the supports that we give students, we give them they earn financial supports in terms of food cards. They get a scholarship that we hold in trust for post-secondary education. They receive mentorship opportunities in the community, and they also receive academic supports after school. And so we surrounded students with these really great supports for 4 years, and we work with them all throughout their high school career. So what happened was when we first started in 2010, we had this group of students that were, being wrapped around with supports. They were thriving in school. They were getting good grades. They were applying to post-secondary. They're applying to college, universities, skilled trades, getting really meaningful work. And after 4 years, we had our first graduation. And so what happened was our team sat down and we celebrated that graduation. These young people who faced a variety of different challenges were able to make it. They were able to apply themselves and they worked hard and they got into post-secondary. So we were like, yay, this is amazing. We did what we were supposed to do. This program actually works. The challenge was that after that graduation, we sent off a number of students to post-secondary, most often college, but we did have some students that go to university. And that's where our program support stopped. And so the question was like, okay, let's see how they do when we're not around, right? Because we're trying to talk about resilience. We're trying to talk about how can they do this on their own. What we found was that fall, after they went to post-secondary, less than 25% of the students who we sent off to post-secondary stayed in post-secondary. And we were really devastated as staff because we thought, we gave them all this support that we know that they can succeed in post-secondary, but why are they struggling? Why do they not able to transition? And so we really, as a program, we kind of had a moment of thought and reflection and say like, are we doing what we said we're doing? And so what we said to ourselves is like, let's take a different approach, because at the beginning we thought graduating from high school was the secret or the success of their transition. If they can get to post-secondary, they'll be fine. What we realized is that no, they needed more. They needed something. What we wanted to find out what it was, and what we discovered was that really what students were lacking were resiliency skills. And so this is where the work around ACEs comes into play. We understand that young people can get all the support. So we gave them financial supports, we gave them the mentorship, we gave them the tutoring supports, but they were still struggling to transition. And so we just said, okay, let's see if we can dig a little bit deeper about resiliency and see how we can make this systematic. And so the young people that you're working with, I'm sharing this because, especially young people who are facing barriers that enter your facilities or your post-secondary institutions, they're facing a variety of different challenges as our students were, right? So how do we connect with students a little bit deeper in order to make them, help them build resiliency within themselves and not rely on programs like Pathways to Education? And so what we did is we started connecting with a really great community organization called Community Resilience Initiative. And you can Google that community organization. It's actually located in Walla Walla, Washington. And why we connected with this organization is because we watched two really powerful documentaries. The first one is called Paper Tigers. And the second, and the sister documentary, is called Resilience. And what these two documentaries talk about is how adversities in childhood can affect long-term health and social outcomes. And we'll talk a little bit more about this today, but we really wanted to dig deeper about this. So we understood that, yes, our young people are facing a lot of different challenges in their upbringing, but how can we help them understand that, but then also leverage that to become more resilient in adulthood? And that's really the kind of question that we were looking to answer. We saw these two documentaries, we were inspired by the work, and then from these two documentaries, the organization Community Resilience Initiative was created. And this is where we get all of our training materials. We become certified trainers. We have a small team of people who do training in the community. And this is where a lot of this, this is where all of this work comes from. You can check out their website, and all the science behind this is, it's really great because they continue to learn and continue to evolve. So we'll get updated slides, we'll get updated information on the newest and most emerging science. But the one thing they talk about is kind of this cluster of sciences called the N.E.A.R sciences. And so N.E.A.R is an acronym that stands for Neuroscience, Epigenetics, ACEs plus, because the adverse childhood experiences study was seminal in our work, but we also know that there's more adversity that happens. And so we'll talk a little bit more about each topic, but right now, just for understanding, it's adverse childhood experiences. And the last one is resilience, because resilience is really a science in itself. But we use these clusters of science to understand young people a little bit better, actually understand anyone a little bit better, and to see how we can actually leverage the science behind resiliency to make sure that young people are understanding that. So we'll walk through it, but I'm going to take a little bit of a water break here. So let's just dive into it. So the first topic that we talk about is neuroscience, and neuroscience is really important. So I don't have a science background, but it's important that we understand how the interaction between the brain and the body works, because you're seeing this day to day in your offices or in your programs at these post-secondary institutions. When we think about what our brain does, it receives information from the outside world through our nervous system, right? The challenge here is that we need to understand that a nervous system needs to develop over time. And there's actually foundational building blocks that happen in childhood that help you become very resilient in adulthood. The very, very first one is like serve return interaction. So this is very, very basic childhood development, where a baby is born, a caring adult will, the baby will coo, the adult will look back make eye contact with the child and make noises back. It's that serve and return. So we talk about the interaction that's fundamental to things like conversation, fundamental things like empathy. And without that kind of early connection, we kind of live our life as in a deficiency, right? So we're talking about, as a child, you're looking to rely on others to support you in times of distress. And if you don't have those early connections, what happens is that you kind of live your life in a way that's relying on other things, right? And so we think about, we talk about being able to regulate our own emotions, or the social emotional skills. Often what we notice with the students that we work with is that they had the academic ability to be in post-secondary. They got the grades, they did the test. They were challenged by often social issues within their own community, their social issues with peers, or unable to regulate themselves during very stressful times like test taking, or for example, when there's an assignment that you don't understand, like how do they approach somebody and say, I need help, right? But we realize that a lot of the young people that we serve, family structure is not as stable as we'd like it to be, right? So how do we take that early deficit and make it catch up? You're almost playing catch up throughout early life. And so that mirror neurons, serve and return, is super important. And we think about what our brain does to receive information. It's through our nervous system. When we think about all the things that we're taking in, right? So it's one of those really kind of basic things where, when you're a baby, you're touching, you're feeling, you're smelling, you're putting things in your mouth. All those experiences are very important to development in the long term. And so when we think about what this does is that our brain starts, the reason why we're tasting everything, or putting everything in the mouth, is our brain is trying to catalog all experiences. Because what our brain is really trying to do is make sure that we're taking more of a predictive mode to facing opportunities. So when you think about, let's say you get called down to the office, right? You're in the school and you're going to speak to the principal. Most often those experiences feel negative. You probably got in trouble. And so your brain starts interpreting, okay, every time that you get called on the office, it's likely because something's going wrong. And so when a person is living their life in constant turmoil, constant stress, when there's a challenge, your brain's saying like, whoa, this is going to be difficult. It's going to be very difficult for you. You shouldn't go. Keep yourself safe. Stay here. Don't write that email back. Don't make that phone call that you need to do, because our brains doesn't know that you got to handle that massive assignment. Our brains just know that that's very stressful, probably more stress than we're able to handle. And so we think about opportunities at post-secondary level. Why young people are not doing so well? It's often because of stress or anxiety of a really challenging situation. So what the answer to that is, we have to actually give ourselves opportunities to push ourselves into stress, but letting people know that we are and we're going to do it in a small dose of stress, and also in a caring and buffering zone with an adult, right? So when we're asking someone, hey, can you come meet with me at my office? Understand that meeting someone in an office may be a negative thing for a person. And so how do we make that connection early to say, this is what that's going to look like in our meeting. This is what I can do for you. This is what I'm going to present for you while we're having conversations. It's important to understand that. The last piece around neuroscience is that is there hope, right? Just because there's deficiencies in childhood doesn't mean that we can't learn or relearn these opportunities. That's where the term neuroplasticity comes in, right? What we know is that people can continue to learn throughout the lifespan. The only caveat is that as we get older, our brain continues to mature, and it just takes more energy to learn these skills, right? And so when we think about young people, I often see it where people say, oh, that young person is so resilient. And sometimes I'm like, well, it's not resiliency that they're showing, it's survival, that their survival has just helped them keep going forward and forward, right? So I know that I've worked with young people who are very, very gifted academically, but when they go to post-secondary, they just really fold. There's no structure for support, because their way of coping with their stress was diving into academics, right? They're only quiet, the place where they can find agency was academics, and then they often struggled in that social sphere. And so we think about neuroscience, and we're not going to get too deep into it today because it's obviously just an overview, but there is way more work around understanding the connection between the brain and the nervous system, and understanding how we interpret threat, how we interpret challenges in our lives, and how our brain is kind of wired to keep us safe at all times. And so what we're seeing in our spaces is not someone that doesn't want to be there, that wants to fail at school. What you're seeing is their brain keeping them as safe as possible and giving them some agency. So that's a little bit about neuroscience. Like I said, it's just an overview. We do go deeper into it in the courses that we teach. The second one is epigenetics. And so epigenetics is like emerging science that really says that environmental influences affect how genes are expressed or silenced. So kind of like switched on or off. And a cool understanding about this is there's been a few experiments, and I will say that the caveat with epigenetics is that it's hard to test epigenetics because humans don't live in controlled environments, right? But they've done some really cool experiments where you see this epigenetic phenomenon exist. The one that you might have heard about is the cherry blossom experiment. So they took mice and they put them in a box. And what happened is they pumped in the scent of cherry blossoms into this box. And when that scent was pumped in, the floor became, they electrocuted the floor. And so then the rats would feel the electric pulse when that scent came in. They took those rats that experienced that experiment and bred them. The pups from that rat never met their father, were put through the same similar experiment where they put them in the box, they pumped the cherry blossom scent in that box. And what they found was that the rats, the pups, the little baby rats, would freak out just like the parents did, right? Without even knowing them. So what they're trying to find out is, do our experiences are passed down to our next generation, right? Is that something that is possible? And they're trying to find out is like, yeah, it's likely true. When we think about why this is an issue is because trauma is passed on and adversity is passed on. Maybe not the example itself, but what it does to your body, that sending your body into that fight or flight mode constantly can be passed on to our offspring. And so when we think about, in a Canadian context, one of the challenges of residential schools, some of the people that may not understand what happened in the schools will say things like, that happened generations ago. Why is it affecting you today, right? But the reality is that generational trauma is passed down from generation to generation. And so when we think about how can we stop this, it's really providing more positive opportunities to rewire that kind of those really harmful effects, and understanding that this is not a life sentence, right? Just because you've experienced trauma, we can break that cycle by creating positive experiences in people's lives. And so really understanding that epigenetics is a new field. It's like I said, it's emerging. It's not necessarily concrete evidence just yet, but there's more and more work leading towards that. This is something that's very real, and it's happening in demographics all over the world. There's a lot of really cool studies. I would say if you YouTube epigenetics, lots of really cool things to understand there, and different experiments have happened across the world. So let's talk a little bit about ACEs. I know this is why people have come here today. And so the caveat that I give about adverse childhood experiences is that it is not a life sentence. That's the one thing I want you to take away today. If you don't take anything from the chat, is that just because you've experienced adverse childhood experiences in your life or in the lives of young people that you work with, it doesn't mean that you're doomed. That's not what science says. Science says that we can totally change that trajectory. And there's just a few techniques and ways to do that. But I want to share a short video that comes from the documentary Resilience, the one that kind of helped us launch into this work. And it's just a quick video. It talks to you a little bit about adverse childhood experiences, but we'll talk a little bit about how this kind of phenomenon or this level of work has changed a little bit over the next little while. But let's take a look at the video and we'll go from there.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Anda and Felitti tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems, and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity,
Okay, so I hope that video, gives a kind of a quick overview of adversity. And so if you want to learn more, definitely you can Google Kaiser Permanente regional ACEs study. And so I actually recommend that you read the study. But what's really important about this is that, like I said, I think it's important, especially if you're starting to learn this information, do not start asking people their adversities in childhood because we're not equipped to provide the answers. What we're asking is that you start considering or changing the lens that you see people in, understanding that there might be something more that why they're exhibiting the behaviors they're exhibiting, right? So if they're missing their appointments, if they're not following up on the things they need to do, right? If they're coming to see you and they're talking about having challenges with relationships, there might be something more. And so for us, we're always talking about, instead of moving from being furious to being curious, right? To understanding a little bit more, opening the conversation, and really listening. I think in the end, people want to be heard. I think one of the things of the video that I loved about Ambassador, why I do this work more frequently now, is because it gives people an answer. It gives them relief to that whatever happened to them in childhood isn't their fault, but that it's not a life sentence. We can continue to work on it. We can learn about it. So it's kind of that therapeutic interaction that can happen on a daily basis. And so we think about what's this study did was started helping us understand that adversity is happening everywhere, right? The original study was in a demographic that could afford health insurance in the States, middle class, college educated people, most predominantly white. So we think about all the demographics of people who don't have all that kind of privilege, what's affecting our neighborhoods and our communities. And so that's really where we start to do the work we do. So what happens if we don't address adversity, if we just let it go and let it slide, is we see things in our lives, in our communities that we see day to day, right? Things of, lack of physical activity, health and exercise, drug use or substance use, things like missed work. It leads to, things like diabetes, depression, suicide, ideation. And so not to say that if you have adversity, you will have these. I want to be very clear about that. You just have a higher likelihood, or you're more at risk. So it's about having an opportunity to understand what's my risk based on my adversity in childhood. So that's something that's really important to understand. And then when we think about, so that original study was amazing. It started to help us believe, okay, well, we know that this is happening in our communities. What else is happening, right? So we call these emerging ACEs. So emerging things that are happening, and we will go more deep into them in the training. But we talk about now we're seeing adverse community environments, right? So when you're living in neighborhoods that are, just ravaged by social housing and poverty and lack of infrastructure. The neighborhood that we serve here in Kingston, we didn't get like complete sidewalks until 2 years ago. So, in the 2020s, we got our first set of sidewalks in the community. Those are systematic things that are happening in communities are all over Canada that are affecting our, giving us ACEs. Adverse circuitry expression, people we understand that brains are wired differently, right? People have different approaches, but they're still, biased towards people who seem to be, have different ways of expressing themselves, who have just the neurodiversity is very important to understand. And we call that adverse circuitry expressions. The example I always give here is we had a student who went through high school, actually went through all of elementary school and all of high school, and they were defined as defiant, that they didn't make friends, that they were antisocial. They had a psychoeducational assessment, psychosocial assessment, and then they were diagnosed on the spectrum. So the way that they needed to be supported looked differently than the people who had neurodiversity in their own world. So really important to understand. The next one is adverse catastrophic events. These are things like war, things like pandemics, right? Global pandemics. Those are really challenging situations that are affecting us. So when we think about, COVID-19, in our thought is that that's likely an adverse childhood experience for a lot of people, right? And so maybe it didn't happen in your childhood, but it's producing toxic stress and really challenging situations in our lives. The last one we talk about is adverse cultural expressions. And these are things like that are biases or negative effects towards cultures or people. And we think about things like racism, ableism. Most of the isms are things that often, get overlooked as damaging, but they can be very damaging. When we think about microaggressions, taking one microaggression, but if you're having microaggression every single day, those things are just take a toll on your body, take a toll on your mind. And so what are the people that you're seeing day to day in your offices? Are they experiencing some of these challenges, right? And are we taking approaches to connect with that, understand that? Or are we using punitive measures to try to correct those challenges, right? And that's the kind of question that we ask. How are we connecting better with people in those ways? And the last thing is we talk about resilience. So resilience is so important because we talk about, I forgot to change the little logos here, graphics here. But when we think about resilience, people always say it's about bouncing back. But the reality is, can you bounce back from a challenging situation by drinking a case of beer, right? Can you bounce back from a situation by taking drugs, right? Opiates, yes, that's bouncing back. So the definition of resilience that we use is resilience is adapting to life changes with positive skills, strategies, tools, and competencies, right? And so I think we really have to forget that resilience is an individual approach. It should be, resilience thrives in community. We are social creatures. We need to be working together. So no longer can we think of it as pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, but saying, who's going to help us put our boots on and help us tie our shoes, right? And who's going to help us learn to walk? That's really what we think about resilience. And so I know sometimes your work is not necessarily coaching or mentoring a certain situation, but we can do these things in small doses throughout our work. Starts as simple as a check-in at the beginning of the meeting, right? Tell me how you're feeling today. If this is an analogy, pick a song. What song are you feeling like today, right? And then you'll find that those things, you'll get a lot of insights, right? Someone will say like, I'm thinking Pharrell Happy, and you're like, oh, okay, tell me more, right? Or they'll say something like, any song, pick a song, and you can just ask questions that help you understand the person a little bit better. What you're doing is you're connecting that person. You're helping them make neural connections that say, this person is safe. When I come to see this person in this office, I feel safe, right? So little tricks like that then help build resilience. We want to know that it's really important to understand that resilience is developed over a lifespan. It doesn't just happen in childhood. It happens in adolescence. It happens in that transition from adolescence to adulthood. And we have to model it. We have to teach it. We have to promote it. And to be honest, they have to fail at it, right? Because we learn when we fail. So when you don't see resilience, right, in the clients that you work with or young people that you work with, I'm not saying call it out, but say, okay, let's learn from this, right? What didn't go right? And really use the word resilience. We're trying to work on resiliency in these aspects, right? The last piece, which I get all fired up about, is our society uses, our North American society, I guess Western culture uses punitive measures to try to change behaviors. And it's so interesting because that's not what the science says. The science says that we need to use connection to change behaviors, not punitive measures, because punitive measures feel good for a second, but neither the person who applied the punitive measure or the person who received punitive measure will say like, oh, that was amazing. Thank you for kicking me out of school, right? That really helped me be better, right? Or thank you for no longer allowing me, I missed my meeting. I'm no longer allowed to come to your session. I really learned that I should go to the meeting. Like it's kind of backwards. And I think that we understand that it might be an easier approach, but punitive measures just don't work. And so we really teach ways to find approaches that are going to help you build more resilience as opposed to making those punitive measures that in the end break relationship, right? Because without relationship, those things won't happen. And the really important thing to think about is like your own experience. Think about someone who mentored you or coached you. How did they do that? Did they do it by setting, people say, oh, they gave me tough love. And maybe they were tough on you, but I guarantee you they gave you a lot more love than they give toughness, right? And so we think about resilience, it's really about that. Our young people coming to our spaces, are we challenging them? But then also, do we have a level of relationship that matters, right? That matches that level of challenge. And the example that I usually give is if I was in this space right now, I'd say, everyone who's got a wallet on them. And so, people would raise their hand with their wallet. And I'd ask like, who let me hold their credit card? And most people let me hold their credit card, right? But then I'd say, who is willing to give me their PIN? And then no one would, right? And then so I'd say, okay, well, why won't you give me the PIN? And the answer you often get is because I don't know you, right? And so right there, I'm asking for a high expectation with a low relationship. And so what that means, it doesn't match. You're not going to give it to me. So when are we asking young people for high expectations, but we have zero relationship? And that's why it doesn't work, right? And so understand that, remember that analogy around, would you give someone your PIN to your credit card if you didn't know them? And the answer is no, because the expectation is high, but the relationship is low. So our role as adults is really helping them to flip that. We want to have high relationships that match the expectation, because what's going to happen is that young people will connect with that and will follow through and build things like resiliency, build things like accountability, and really kind of go from there. So it's a really important thing, but it's a science that we have to learn it. It's really important. So just to wrap up, I know you're thinking, Roger, you talked a million things today. You dived, you touched about science, but I'm not an expert. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. And the thing is, I'm not asking you to be a counselor. I'm not asking you to be more than what you are, right? But what we take is a trauma responsive approach is we say, we don't know what people are coming to us with, but we'll treat you like with kindness. We'll treat you with this approach, because it's like the pandemic where we wore our masks at all time, right? We protected ourselves, we protected others at all times with a mask. I'm not getting into the mask debate, but just, we wore something to help others and to help ourselves. And this is what a trauma responsive approach is. Sometimes it's called trauma informed care. But I think we use trauma responsive because informed is just knowing about it. Responsive is actually, doing something about it. So that's the terminology might be a little bit different. But one of our favorite authors in this work, his name is Dr. Bruce Perry. He wrote an awesome book called The Boy Who's Raised as a Dog. And he also just wrote a book with Oprah called What's Happened to You. And he says, we don't need to be therapists in order to be therapeutic, right? We always talk about little small interactions that can connect with people in huge ways. Right. And so we think about who does this really well is like big businesses, like Amazon. Have you ever shopped with Amazon? Like if you don't like something, you send it back, they'll send you your money. They'll tell you to keep the thing. they want to keep you happy because they want you to stay there, right? So we need to do that. We need to keep people connected. We need to keep people engaged, so that they can come and they come back to us, and then we can do some of that really great work. But I can really tell you that every interaction can be therapeutic, and I can't say that enough. I've seen it in the work, and when we train people, they come back and say the same thing. It's like I kind of see the world in a different lens. And so when we think about this work, what I'm asking you today, if you're starting this journey, just dig a little bit deeper, really start asking more questions and connecting. So what's the secret formula? Just to wrap up, I got a few points. The first thing is I really encourage you to learn more about neuroscience and the science behind adversity and toxic stress. Toxic stress is killing our people. It's really is. And we act like we don't know what the cause is. We do, right? We really need to work on that. So I would say, please continue to read, continue to take trainings. We offer lots of courses that you can take. So please continue to learn the neuroscience, specifically around adversity and toxic stress. Reimagine and challenge inequitable practices, policies, and procedures. And this is really important because it's difficult to do that, right? So sometimes I work most often in high schools, and I have to challenge things like, why are you suspending this person for the 10th time, right? Like what have they learned from the first 9 times, right? And it's hard to have that voice, right? So in your systems, think about those punitive measures that try to make change, but are not working, right? And so how do we take different approaches to do that, right? And specifically ask yourself, who's being most affected by this, right? I know a lot of post-secondary institutions right now are big on EDIIA. They want to get, underrepresented people into their communities. But the question is, are you ready for that, right? Are you ready to deal with some of the challenges that we're facing, right? And if you're not, then maybe we should put a pause on that big outreach, right? Because I think what happens is you do it performatively, or what happens is it happens in a way that is not actually better helping people enter your spaces. So it's a little bit of a piece there. Co-regulation is really important. So co-regulation is understanding your own systems and having yourself and your brain activated to receive information. So using that prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain, that helps really make meaningful connections. That's a skill that is missed. I've been in meetings where there's people who are just angry and yelling at each other. These are adults in high level positions, angry, yelling at each other, sometimes crying, showing lots of emotion. That is not a conversation. That's a dysregulated conversation. And so if we're going to have conversations, serious conversations, deep conversations with young people, we have to say that, so I do that sometimes. I'll say, like, I've had a really difficult morning. I got to regulate myself. I'm going to take a few deep breaths. I'm going to, put my feet firmly on the ground. Even right now, I have my feet flat on the ground as I'm presenting to you, because it helps me release some of that stress. So regulation is really, really important. If you don't know too much about regulation, I really encourage you to learn about it. The next one is relationships before expectations. I use that example about the wallet and the credit card. Ask yourself, is this relationship high enough for me to meet this expectation? And challenge that. Like, how do you get that? And if the answer is no, then you got to spend more time on that relationship before you build that expectation. And the last one is, we got to think about the long term, right? So right now I work with young people, and I used to think as long as I get them past high school, they're good, right? But what we learned is that, like, it's not about high school. It's not about this age. It's about, will they be healthy adults, functioning adults that are resilient, can bounce back and face challenges in everything that they do. So even if your role is not that, it's not that long-term piece, understand that you're contributing to that, right? So really thinking, what can I do right now to help this person learn it so they can be successful later on, right? And you'll find that, when we think about trauma, I want to be really clear that it's not a life sentence. If you faced experiences yourself, or you're working with people who have faced challenges, that doesn't define you, it doesn't define who you are. It just says it's something that's part of your life, but you can build from it, right? So really understanding that there. So those are some of the kind of calls to action from today. I know it's quite short, and I really apologize that I didn't have more time, but I wanted to cover as much as I could in a short amount of time. So with that, I want to say thank you so much. And we are going to open up for questions, but I want to thank Emily. I want to thank the Center for inviting us to speak about this. If you want to learn more about the kind of learning side or the teaching side of the work that we do offer courses for staff. We do professional development. We do consulting. Check out our website, teachresilience.ca. And if you want to learn more about Pathways Education and the model, it's specifically how we transition young people from post-secondary to the kind of spaces that you work in. If you're a success facilitator or a university or a college counselor, we do have that transition. And we have a lot of people that enter your spaces because they come from different neighborhoods that are already seeking equity in deserving equity in a lot of the spaces that they're already in. So please reach out if you have any questions, comments. Like I said, we want to have 1,000 cups of drinks with people. So reach out if you need anything. But just thank you so much, Emily. I see that you're on the screen again for inviting me, and I can stick around for sure a little bit later than we're supposed to if you'd like, and we can chat as well.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for that, Roger. That was excellent. I think we're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat, and it looks like folks got a lot out of that. So we do have a few questions in our Q&A. So I'm going to start with the first one. So the question for you, Roger, is can you speak to how to navigate and encourage resilience when the individual or youth displays prominent learned helplessness, i.e. opportunities for change are available, but the youth is unmotivated and very passive?
Those are, yeah, we work with those students all the time. And the reality is that going back to like questioning punitive measures to take change, like change isn't the pace that we set it. It's the pace that the person sets it, right? So if your job is to make that huge change, I would go back to your manager and say, like, this is not going to happen in the amount of time. And I likely what's happening, it's just like, we think about misbehaviors, we call that miscommunication, and we label that miscommunication. Because what happens is if a young person could say, like, this is what I need, you would give it to them, right? But you can't, and they can't articulate that. So it's really about building that relationship. So I would question, like, how high is your relationship with that person? And are you in that coaching zone just yet? Or are you more in that, like, we call it the peanuts zone, where you're just like spitting off all the resources available, right? And I think that comes from a good place. I tease about it, but it comes from a place of we want to help the person so badly that we're just giving them all the resources, right? But sometimes as professionals or people who work in this field or supportive in this field, we have to take time to step back, right? And just listen and just be there with the person, because just being there with the person and not just showing that you're not leaving, physically not leaving, you're probably making more healing interaction than if you were to give them all the resources or take them to somewhere like that. That's very healing. So that's why I think don't underestimate the power of a healing interaction. Like, do not underestimate, because it's very powerful.
Fantastic. All right. Another question we have here is, how did the Pathways program change to build resilience skills?
Good question. So the first thing we did is that we all kind of did the head smack, and we just said, okay, we got to change this around. So what we did is we started taking more and more courses. We started doing more and more learning, professional development on an individual and as a team level. And we started teaching this to our students. So we didn't just teach adults. We started teaching to our students, specifically the students that were on the transition path into post-secondary, because we knew that's kind of what the mandate of our program is. So we said, if you're going to go to post-secondary, you really got to understand the challenges that you're going to face. More than half, I think it's 52% of our students are first-generation learners, which means they'll be the first in their families actually to attend post-secondary. So one thing that we missed was that we thought they would understand the system, but they're actually like literally navigating like Mars, right? They're going to a place they've never heard of, they've never seen, they have no experience based on, parental or family involvement. And so we just had to like break it down. So we started very small steps, taking students to campus, walking them around. We're lucky we have a lot of campuses here in Kingston, walking them around before they even took an application in there on the screen. We brought them to campus, we brought them to fun events. And so some of the schools that we work with, post-secondary schools that we work with, are really great for inviting us, right? So if you're working with young people who are facing a variety of challenges, don't invite them for, pick your classes or pick your programs. Invite them for lunch, invite them for breakfast, see what it's like. So maybe not a full day, right? Don't do a full day event, do a breakfast. Come for breakfast, see what it's like to eat in a cafeteria, right? Come for lunch and see what it's like to be in a lecture hall. So when we think about adversities, we don't want to give large doses of adversity, large doses of challenge. We want to give small challenges where young people can feel safe. And if they don't feel safe, then we're there to say, okay, it's only going to be an hour. We'll go back to the office, right? So it's like that. You're bringing challenges in a small amount, as opposed to saying, it's like you're not pushing them off the cliff. You're saying, take a step on that rock first, right? And then we'll go from there. So we're working towards that cliff. But right now, we take a small step on that rock. So that's we do it smaller than really small, like baby steps.
Like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to give them small doses of challenge as a way of sort of inoculating them for resiliency. That's fascinating. I want to get, there's maybe 4 minutes left, so I just want to give you one last shot, Roger, if there's anything that you want to add, anything that you want to say, maybe your big take-home message that you'd like people to remember.
And this is literally a countdown because my computer's about to die. So what I have to say to everyone on this call is that you are doing good work, right? You're doing this work, You may not have a framework for it, but most people in this work are very kind to people. So continue to leverage that, right? Start there. I know what I shared today might be big. You're like, oh, how do I do all that at once? Start from kindness. If you start from kindness, you're on the right step. And just take, like we do with young people, we take small steps. We make lots of mistakes in our program. I still make lots of mistakes. I get dysregulated sometimes, but I don't, again, I don't take punitive measures myself. I'll say, you know what, that's a mistake that you made. Let's step back, right? And I think one of the coolest things that I've learned is apologizing to young people when we make mistakes or when the systems don't work for them. They don't hear that enough. And so just bringing grace to yourself and your work. And I know that if you're kind and you're doing this work from your heart, you're on the right step. We just need to put a little bit of framework on that. And then you're going to be awesome and you're going to be amazing people that support young people. But do not underestimate a small healing interaction. It's very powerful. Because when you think about a person that mentored you or whatever, like you probably didn't have them for a long time. People say teachers, like, who's your favorite teacher? They'll be like, oh, Miss McCary in kindergarten. Like she might have had you for like, what, 7 months, but she changed your life, right? And so that's the same thing with adults. So we can be those small healing interactions and do not underestimate that.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so very much, Roger. It was excellent to have you here on our webinar. Thank you also to our audience. We really appreciated everyone who came out and joined us today. It was a fantastic webinar. I want to remind you all that our next webinar is going to be on the topic of early psychosis intervention. So come check that out on February 7th. We look forward to seeing you all there. And again, please complete the survey upon closing this webinar. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.